Israel strikes Hezbollah targets, intense exchange on Lebanon border. The Hill. The Israeli military exchanged fire with Hezbollah militants on Saturday as skirmishes with the GROP continue at the Lebanon-Israel border. Israel launched airstrikes on multiple Hezbollah positions near the Lebanese border as the Iran-backed militant group launched rockets towards Israeli targets, the Associated Press reported. Hezbollah has repeatedly threatened escalation amid Israel's war with Hamas. Below are your comments. Nasrallah is right when he says what Israel does to Lebanon will determine how Hezbollah will act. Only it is the opposite of what they allude to. If Israel does nothing when Hezbollah attacks, they will ramp up their attacks and will only hold back if the price of attacking Israel is too high. Hamas said that Gaza was a nation of martyrs. It's more or less a self-fulfilling prophecy for Hamas since 10/7. Nasrallah merely said that they have been at war since 10/8. Neither terrorist organization is prepared for the angry onslaught of the angered IDF soldiers and commanders. Hezbollah has repeatedly threatened escalation amid Israel's war with Hamas. Right, like Israel has. Heard that one before. After Israel makes hummus out of Hamas, Hezbollah is next. I am sure they are already on the border saying F around and find out. But that war would be no different. Please wait a moment. What I will not want to hear, American citizens whining when they are trapped in Lebanon. Unlike the surprise attack that came from Gaza, this has been brewing for a month now with numerous warnings issued. Even the Israelis in northern Israel have evacuated to the south. Nasrallah is going to ha. Why are these articles acting as if Hezbollah is separate from Lebanon and Hamas is separate from Gaza? Gaza attacked Israel. Now Israel is invading and destroying Gaza. Lebanon is attacking Israel. What do you think is going to happen? Oh look, Israel bombed Lebanon. The idea that a group can fire. Next news. Why does Turkey want other countries to start spelling its name, Turkiye? The conversation. Turks have called their country Turkiye since 1923. Chris McGrath, Getty Images. Is Turkey's recent spelling change about being more authentically Turkish? Or is there more to the story? In June 2022, the United Nations agreed to change the spelling of the country known in the English-speaking world as Turkey to Turkiye, heeding a request by the government of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In January 2023, the U.S. State Department also agreed to adopt the requested change in its written C. Below are your comments. Sorry, that contains a character mark, the umlaut, which isn't supported by my English language keyboard. By the way, most languages don't refer to other nations by what they call themselves. Since the bird took its name after the country, if the country changes its name, should the name of bird also change to match it? Turkey is no longer the secular democracy founded by Ataturk when the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I. It has morphed into a theocratic autocracy under Erdogan. Turkey is actively undermining NATO, along with circumventing Western sanctions against Russia. They should be immediately kicked out. Erdogan should worry more about construction standards and less what other people call his country. Only countries who have a bleeply sense of pride with a bloated perception of nationalism and extreme allergy to colonialism will undertake changing their country's names, not appreciating the history that comes with it. Take for instance, if Americans were such nationalistic nuts, we would probably are. Next news. Ukraine minister says he wants to turn his country into a weapons production hub for the West. Associated Press. Ukraine's newly appointed head of defense industry says he is working tirelessly to ramp up local arms production and wants to turn the country into a weapons production hub for the West. Alexander Kamysahan, the Minister for Strategic Industries of Ukraine, said that Russia's invasion of his country and the Israel-Hamas war raging in the Middle East have highlighted the need for rise to spend on their defense systems. We're really focusing on making Ukraine the arsenal of the free world. Below are your comments. Yeah, great idea. Let a notoriously corrupt country participate in one of the most notoriously corrupt industries. The arms industry. Talk about an area with zero accountability. Not to mention we are just perpetuating the military-industrial complex, making so many people rich. Ukraine is broke. So what did they do? Take all the donations designed to keep them afloat and open factories with THM? Perhaps the military-industrial complex decided to invest in Ukraine instead of the US. Now they have billions and a new industry. Sounds good. I'm having a hard time staying stocked presently. That's why we will always be dependent on foreign supply as well. Ironic. Long story short, Ukraine wants the American taxpayers to build weapons factories for Ukraine, supply all the blueprints and technology for the weapons, train and pay the Ukrainian workforce, and then give the Ukrainians the weapons and ammunition they produce for free. Next news. Zelensky. War in Middle East diverts attention from Ukraine. This is one of Russia's goals. Ukrainska Pravda. President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that the war in the Middle East diverts attention from Ukraine, which is one of the goals of the Russian Federation. Source. Zelensky at a press conference with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, as reported by Ukrinform news agency. Quote, as for the Middle East, below are your comments. Russia is behind the Israel-Hamas conflict. This is all tied together, and I believe the Hamas attack was orchestrated by Russia and their allies, like Iran. Russia sent captured Ukraine weapons to Hamas. Plus, Republicans sympathize with Russia and are very dedicated to block Ukraine funding to boost Shia's confidence, and the Israel conflict. I do believe Russia, Iran started trouble in the Middle East to draw attention away from Ukraine. T was Putin's only hope of winning. The Ukraine-Russia war was the only game in town. Now that Israel is receiving all the attention and will be getting part of the pot of gold that WOU LD have gone to Ukraine, it's not setting well with Zelensky and Ukraine citizens who are siphoning off dollar from the US. He could still save Ukraine by making a deal similar to the status of Chechnya. Russians fought Chechnya just like this 2 decades ago, but then Russia gave them autonomy, rebuilt Grozny, and it's happily living under the Federation. Ukraine could do just that instead of facing further destruction too. Next news. UN describes Gaza as scene of death and destruction amid food, water challenges. The Hill. A United Nations UN official described Gaza as a scene of death and destruction amid food and water struggles faced by the territory Friday. Thomas White, Gaza director for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, said he has traveled the length and breadth of Gaza in. Below are your comments. Hamas has that good food and water stored underground in tunnels reinforced with concrete and rebar, meant for building housing, along with thousands of missile launchers made from the water pipes meant to bring them water. The fuel needed for the hospitals is being used to ventilate Hamas tunnels. The UN is complicit way more than many think. Refugee status isn't hereditary in customary international law. You can't be refugees for 3 generations. Besides, the UN has never bestowed something similar to any other group in the world. Defund UNRWA ASAP. You reap what you sow. No argument here. The world and Arab states have failed to help with humanitarian aid enough and faster. I agree this is not right and Palestinian civilians need help. But at the same time Israel has every right to defeat Hamas and rescue hostages. That is by far the first priority, period. The UN official newly arrived from Pluto describes Gaza as a scene of death and destruction. Who would have ever thought of that? Usually wars are fought with flowers and pop guns. Next news. Russia opens a vast national exposition as presidential election approaches. Associated Press. With pointed disdain for the West, Russia on Saturday unveiled a sprawling exposition highlighting the nation's accomplishments, which will run through the months leading to the presidential election, in which Vladimir Putin is widely expected to seek a new term. Putin issued a decree in March to hold the exposition, and some observers have seen it as aimed at eating an ideological framework for his re-election. Putin has led Russia as president or prime minister since 2000, and re-election will. Below are your comments. The Russian state collapsed twice in the 20th century, in 1917 and again in 1989. I consider that quite an accomplishment. Oxymoron. Dictator hold his election only in Russia. Russia is the best country in the world. According to Russia. Enjoy your Chinese cars. I remember going to VDNKH while I was living in Moscow while working for state. Have to say I was reeling wildly from laughing hysterically that these achievements were the best that Russia could offer. Usually about 40 years behind what we had in the US, nowhere equal. And being ticked that my Putin's traditional family values generally accepted norms of morality, ethics and social behavior. Rolling on the floor laughing, he is officially single, has never shown his children, has at least 2 mistresses and 3 or more illegitimate children not in wedlock. Add to this bleep of political opponents, bizarre lie. Next news. Israel's fight with Iran proxies in Syria poisons Russia ties. Bloomberg. Since it went to war with Hamas early last month, Israel has stepped up strikes against Iran-backed militias in Syria who have moved close to the Israeli border. Most read from Bloomberg. Amazon's Jeff F. Bezos announces move to Miami from Seattle. Sam Bankman-Fried convicted of fraud in stunning FTX crash. Biggest cross-asset rally this year takes Wall Street by storm. Iceland's Blue Lagoon on alert for Magma flows after earthquakes. Israel's fight with Iran proxies in Syria poisons Russia tie. Below are your comments. I would also assume that Russia is very, very weak with its war with Ukraine. Due to Ukrainians able to fight back and destroy Russians and with our help. This is why we aid Ukraine to weaken Russia, which is also an enemy of us. The only reason Israel is able to do what it's doing is the U.S. carrier groups in the Gulf. Let's not make it seem otherwise. Russia doesn't have friends. They have those they use with a smile, and those they oppose with purpose. Ultimately, Russia is behind this whole thing. Russia through Iran and then through Hamas and Hezbollah. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, the Iraqi Shias, the Bashar Assad Syrians, and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah. They are all working for Iran's occupying fake Islamic terrorist regime. All of these havocs comes from these Islamic terrorists in Iran. Next news. Time for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia isn't yet ripe, Italian Defense Minister. Ukrainsk. A Pravda. Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto believes the time for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia isn't yet ripe. Source. Crosetto in an interview with Quotidiano Nazionale, as reported by European Pravda details. Crosetto acknowledged that attention towards Russia's war against Ukraine has now waned, albeit not at a political level, only at media level. Below are your comments. So if the US would have said after 18 months of fighting Hitler, Mussolini, let's talk peace, how would LD Hitler take that? He won in his mind and the Americans don't want to fight and he would take either now or next year hat he wants. Same with Putin. Obama gave Putin Crimea. If Biden allows, then you support them Italy to the very end. Just like the Republicans pre-World War II. Isolationist, and cheering for the bad guys. Once again Republicans in the USA are isolationist, and cheering for the bad guys, Muscovy, to win. This conflict will last a decade or more. The Western leaders are willing to fund it. And when Russia starts to falter, China will fund it. Geopolitics on full display. Both sides are corrupt, complicit, and incompetent. The poor across the world will suffer. The time for peace talks will be when Putler has been poisoned by his own men and all of Ukraine is whole again, including Crimea. Please wait a moment. Next news. Military intelligence. Russia fails nuclear-capable ballistic missile tests. Kyiv Independent. Russia recently carried out unsuccessful tests of its Yars and Balava nuclear-capable ballistic missiles, pointing to serious issues with Moscow's nuclear weapons delivery capabilities, Ukraine's military intelligence said on November. Below are your comments. Because as much as Putin wants it to be, Russia is not the Soviet Union. They are weak and broken. They can't even keep one carrier operational, for God's sake. They are a washed-up wannabe superpower who can't even take the capital in Ukraine literally right next door to them. I really wish NATO and who really knows if these so-called unsuccessful tests were successful but reported as unsuccessful as part of disinformation campaigns by both sides. Sadly, it only takes one or two successful ones. Russia can't even land on the moon without crashing into it, and you expect their ballistic missile technology to be any better? Russia is the remnant of a failed superpower that is on the long decline to insignificance. They will have to satisfy themselves being China's lapdog. What I find astonishing is the fact that people are actually willing to launch in Russian-made rockets. These people really don't have a good track record for much of anything they do. Next news. Kremlin ready to accept heavy losses for marginal territorial gains in Ukraine, UK intel reports. New Voice of Ukraine. Over the past 3 weeks, Russia has likely lost around 200 armored vehicles during its assaults on the Donbas town of Avdiivka, reads the latest UK Defence Intelligence report on Ukraine, published on November Below are your comments. So the Russians are okay with heavy losses for the most meager of gains? They will indeed have the heavy losses, but the most meager of gains will elude them, and instead, He will have small to large losses of territory they have captured to show for those huge losses of troop. The most surprising thing about this conflict is the ignorance of the Russian people. They believe this country is so corrupt they would welcome Russian liberation. They stand by and watch sons and daughter march into a land that would rather die than be a part of our Russia. They watch their children. Russia's original goal was probably the coalfields. That's what they'll try to end up with. What the Russians lack in military capability and logic, they make up for with large quantities of slaves willing to die in an unwinnable war. Rusians are docile sheep who just follow orders from the Kremlin. That is why they end up with dictatorship throughout history. Next news. Russia lost about 200 pieces of armored vehicles, UK Defense Intelligence on Avdiivka's assault. Ukrainska Pravda. UK Defense Intelligence assesses that the Russians lost about 200 pieces of armored vehicles during the last 3 weeks while storming the city of Avdiivka. Source: UK Defense Intelligence Review dated 8 October, as reported by European Pravda details. Russian occupiers suffered such losses due to the effectiveness of Ukraine's modern handheld anti-air weapons, mines, uncrewed aerial vehicle-dropped munitions, and precision artillery systems, UK Defense Intelligence noted. Below are your comments. It must be very difficult for the regrouped Russian troops at Avdiivka to crawl forward over the sands of bodies of their fallen comrades, many of whom have been decaying on the battlefield since October 10. 200 greater than pieces less than of armored vehicles, but how many vehicles? Grin. To watch ANZ invading Russian assault in daylight on open fields able to be seen by dozens of ones is crazy. I can only guess that Der Führer Putin using these cannon fodder as bait to have Ukraine expend all its artillery shells and other ammunition on these targets. This even number speak volumes of the truthfulness of this information. But you know it is actually Zelensky is speaking. Love reading these numbers. Next news. Russia conducts unsuccessful tests of nuclear weapons carriers. Ukrainska Pravda. Ukrainian intelligence reported that Russia conducted unsuccessful tests of nuclear weapons carriers, Yars and Balava missiles, in late October and early November. Source: Ukraine's Defense Intelligence quote. On 1 November 2023, the aggressor state Russia conducted unsuccessful tests of the -24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missile, which is the main ground-based component of the strategic nuclear force of the Russian Federation. Below are your comments. For decades NATO policy was deterrence. Maybe at the right time for NATO to show some fangs. Perfect time to check ours and see how it works right over the Kremlin. Not surprising one bit. Just look at all of their so-called tanks being blown to bits with children's toys equals drones. Laughing my butt off at Putler. Please wait a moment. Those clumsy Russians. It's a miracle that no U.S. astronaut, or any other astronaut by the way, died using Russian rockets to reach the International Space Station. They should have used the much safer American space shuttles instead. Besides, the Ukrainian press would never lie to us to make Russie. Yes, another attempt by the Ukraine to minimize the risk of thermonuclear war. Their weapons won't work, so escalate further. Next news. Russian invaders suffering losses like never before. Kyiv won't capitulate, Danilov says. The nouveau ice of Ukraine. Russian invaders in Crimea are suffering defeats like never before, especially the Black Sea Fleet. Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, NSDC, said in an interview with Ukrainian radio on November. Below are your comments. Support for the Ukraine is about support for democracy worldwide. Ain't no democracy in Russia. Only the tyrants in the U.S. Support the tyrant in Russia. Russia does not care about its losses. Both countries believe that they are fighting for their survival. Pretty sure the fate of Ukraine has already been sealed. The EU. I read a new report 2 hours before this one came out that was saying how bad Ukraine is losing. It's sad and unfortunate, however Ukraine will lose this war. Anyone with any comprehension at all could see this back when it started. I admire the Ukraine people so much, however the numbers aga. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that 98% of the military equipment promised to Ukraine has been delivered, and today I read that $55 billion is being given to Ukraine by Europe to keep he fighting going through the winter. So they might be okay for a little while, you would think. Next news. UN chief condemns attack on ambulance convoy in Gaza. This must stop. The Hill. The United Nations, UN, condemned a recent attack by Israel on a convoy of ambulances leaving a Gaza hospital. I am horrified by the reported attack in Gaza on an ambulance convoy outside Al-Shifa Hospital, Antonio Guterres posted on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Now, for nearly 1 month, civilians in Gaza. Below are your comments. Blame Hamas, not Israel. Can't let Hamas run away to fight again another day. That's common sense, but the UN has no common sense, only an agenda that doesn't include freedom and safety for the world it wants to rule over. Has no clue that terrorists routinely travel in ambulances as do drug dealers and sex traffickers. Terrorists will use any means possible to commit terrorist acts. That's their sworn duty. Only one way to solve the problem. Removal. Once again you got lied to by Gaza health officials. Have you already forgotten they said the IDF bleep hundreds of polys in the hospital when it was Hamas failed rocket that hit the parking lot? Was he this outraged when Russia was found to be targeting the Red Cross, and any other medic service, vehicles, and personnel in Ukraine? Yeah, I thought not. Next news. US and EU officials discuss possible negotiations with Russia with Ukraine. Ukrainska Pravda. Officials from the US and the EU have started discussing with Ukraine the possibility of holding peace talks with Russia. Source: NBC News with reference to unnamed present and former high-ranking American officials, as reported by European Pravda details. NBC News said, in particular, they had discussed what Ukraine might have to give up in order to reach agreements. Below are your comments. Very consistent. The West gets soft knees very easily and abandons its struggling allies. Instead of standing by its ally for the duration of its struggle, it starts wavering with its support very quickly. This is why many countries prefer to ally themselves with the Russians and Chinese for the long. Where is the win-win now? NATO wants out, USA wants out. The win is the end of it. Negotiations? Not when you are ahead. Capitulation or nothing, period. Somehow they have to negotiate an outcome where both sides can save face. I find it hard to believe Kiev forces will come out of this as massive losers. Crimea will remain Russian, the eastern independent states must have autonomy and will obviously have links to the Russians. I can imagine a no-G. Next news. Ukraine recap. Zelensky denies pressure to enter peace talks. Bloomberg. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pushed back on an NBC report that US and European officials have begun pressuring Kyiv toward possible peace negotiations with Moscow. I do not know who is publishing this and for what, Zelensky said at a press conference with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Ukraine's east and southeast, where Kyiv has been waging a months-long counteroffensive, is not a gridlock, Zelensky added. With winter bearing down, army comma. Below are your comments. It is the nastiest, meanest, most delirious thing to make Ukrainians believe that they will anytime soon join the EU. Ukraine will lose this war, unfortunately. The EU knows it, the US knows it, and also Zelensky and company knows it. I guess this lame tale serves only one purpose, to keep the Ukrainian pay. If he denies it, then it's all shameful clickbait. We've been supporting Ukraine from the very beginning of the current conflict. Maybe NBC is running low on viewership. You optimists are missing the fact that Putin is an old self-deluded megalomaniac. He doesn't have that long to live, especially not as president. EU? Tongue out fearful face. Next news. Sanctions change means hobbled, China only, NVIDIA A800 GPS now diverted to Western markets. Tom's Hardware. Due to sterner sanctions on tech exports to China, the specially cut down NVIDIA A800 GPU is now being promoted in regions like North and Latin America, Europe, India, etc. Below are your comments. It is indeed a shame for a self-claimed free market economy to disrupt a company's business. If anybody disrupts the natural flow of goods and services, there will always be numerous natural ways to overcome the man-made distortions through third-party while they are already on the process of mass-producing their equivalent chips using their own architecture designs. Market denial by the. Will these additional, diverted markets make up for the huge market loss of China? If so, then I guess NVIDIA will be no worse for the wear. If not, then WHO makes up the shortfall? Will this be a loss for the company, or will this be yet another bill tacked onto the annual taxes of the American M? This particular product may well have to withdraw from the markets altogether, after its stock is sold out. Will be good to unload this inventory and change the TSMC production line back to higher margin H100s and A100s. Next news. Zelensky, Ukraine is not asking for concessions on its EU accession path. Ukrainska Pravda. Ukraine is not asking for any concessions on its path toward accession to the European Union and is implementing the European Commission's recommendations it has received. Source: President Volodymyr Zelensky during a press conference with President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen, as reported by Interfax Ukraine news agency. Quote from Zelensky: "We have implemented the recommendations that were required to begin accession negotiations." Below are your comments. Ukraine is no ready. 1/3 foreign aid missing during martial law? Only possible with corruption on the highest level in Ukrainian government. Ukrainians spend years using corruption to steal from their country, and not invest in the military. Oligarchs buying villas on free. Ukraine has been trying to hand this war off to NATO since it started. This is good news from Zell. Quite how he will expel all the fraudsters close to him in such a short window I don't know. And the E greater than U greater than will of course fall for this fairy story. Nothing that more U greater than S $$ won't put right though. Next news. Former NATO chief backs pause in Gaza war, but not ceasefire. The Hill. The former leader of NATO said a humanitarian pause in Gaza makes sense, citing the need to help civilians in the region as the war between Israel and Hamas militants continues. but he refused to back a full ceasefire in the conflict. I don't think a sweeping, in place, ceasefire is appropriate from the military. Below are your comments. What would a ceasefire do? It's not like Hamas hadn't agreed to a ceasefire before. Look at World War II, we were staying out, negotiating with Japan for peace, that's when we were attacked. Is Gaza gonna turning a shinning sea of democracy? Is the UN willing to provide police, courts, and fair elections? What is the difference between a pause and a ceasefire? Is a pause like halftime in a football game? If there is a pause, will there be halftime entertainment? Will Rihanna entertain during the pause? Gaza is slaughtered by occupants under full support of Western democracy leaders, and world only watching this genocide continue. A genocide is happening in Gaza in front of the whole world. Wake up, humanity. Urging for pauses is not enough. No pause. No way. Next news. Israel-Hamas war puts China's strategy of balanced diplomacy in the Middle East at risk. The conversation. China's President Xi Jinping meets Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Beijing on June 14, 2023. Jade Gao, AFP via Getty Images on October 30, 2023, reports began to circulate that Israel was missing from the mapping services provided by Chinese tech companies Baidu and Alibaba, effectively signaling, or so some believed, that Beijing was siding with Hamas over Israel in the ongoing war. Within hours, Chinese officials began to push back on that narrative, pointing out that the names do appy. Below are your comments. China is the bigger winner here that gained the high ground. China again is the adult in the room, as in the case of Ukraine. The West, especially US, will suffer a disastrous loss of credibility, giving deranged Netanyahu the go-ahead to crimes against humanity. The kings are naked. Balanced strategy? Chinese strategy is to put the world off balance. Pathetic reporters try everything possible to make this Middle East crisis about China. More so, it puts U.S. support of both Ukraine and Israel at risk. Ukraine and Israel are both the West's problems. Next news. President's office advises Commander-in-Chief not to talk publicly about situation at front. Ukraine. Ska Pravda. Ihor Zovkwa, deputy head of the Office of the President, commenting on an article by Valery Zaluzh. NYI, the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, for The Economist, has said that the military should not talk publicly what is happening at the front. Below are your comments. What the general said is pretty obvious to anyone with a military background. This is the kind of criticism you get from intellectuals with no experience. People need to first get real knowledge through experience before they can reach conclusions about had other people say. There is also such a This general seems to be more interested in ending the bloodshed than the politicians do. Zelensky and Danilov seem to have fallen for their own propaganda. We're losing badly, but don't let the US taxpayers know that. Whatever you do, don't derail our gravy train. American public and the taxpayer funding this war deserve to know the truth. How are politicians, American politicians, elected by Americans, bankrupting our country? Next news. Russians occupiers try to regain lost position near Robotyne and Klishchivka. Ukrainska Pravda. The Russian army unsuccessfully tried to regain their lost position in Klishchivka, Donetsk Oblast, and Robotyne, Zaporizhia Oblast, over the past day. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook. Information as of 1800 on 3 November. Data. ILS. On the Bakhmut front, the Russians unsuccessfully tried to regain their lost position near Klishchi Vika, Donetsk Oblast, 8 times. Below are your comments. The Russian army unsuccessfully tried to regain their lost positions but were slaughtered in the Ort. They sure can use a -10s to compete with the Su-25s flying around out there. Russian army is being ground down. The Russians were delayed by bad weather. The fog was so bad that both sides had to stop. However, the weather has changed. The Russians resumed their offensive and are taking land from the Ukrainians everywhere. Great, Ukraine won and no need to send anything else. The Russians in your country are now refugees and you have to give them money, cell phones and cities. Enship. Next news. Lithuania's foreign minister on making peace with Russia. Our children will curse us in the trenches we are digging for them. Ukrainska Pravda. Gabrielis Landsbergis, Lithuania's foreign minister, has warned other countries against the desire to enter into a peace treaty with Russia, which is waging a war of aggression against Ukraine. Source: Landsbergis on Twitter. X. Cited by European Pravda details. Landsbergis tweeted that for Russia, a peace agreement means only one thing: time to rearm. Below are your comments. We can support Ukraine now and weaken Putin so he doesn't try for more countries in the future, which he will if he gets away with this invasion. We must support Ukraine with everything available. You see how their neighbors feel about them. They have good reasons. Lithuania's foreign minister on making peace with Russia. Our children will curse us in the trenches we are digging for them. You've already cursed your children, and digged graves, not trenches, for them. Lots of Nazis in Lithuania and the other Baltic states. Time for Putin to clean your houses as well. Next news. Ukrainian forces exhaust Russians along contact line on Melitopol front, General Staff report. Ukrainska Pravda. Ukraine's defense forces have been conducting offensive operations on the Melitopol front and exhausting the Russians along this part of the contact line. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook. Information as of 6 o'clock on 4 November. Data. ILS. A total of 66 combat engagements occurred over the past 24 hours. Below are your comments. So what's the status of the big counter-offensive we funded and supplied? It's truly amazing how inept is Putin's Russian military. For 21 months they've been battling in Ukraine, and control less territory there today, compared with March of last year. Putin, his cronies, diminish Ukraine whenever possible. Yet, against what we once thought was a powerful Russian mill. The earlier story today said Ukraine is running out of troops and the US and EU want them to start PEACE talks. Yes, that story was right here on Yahoo. So which one are we to believe? I thought they exhausted Russians last year. Next news. Ukraine's armed forces exhaust Russians, advancing on Melitopol and Bakhmut fronts, General Staff R. Eport, Ukrainska Pravda. The General Staff of the Armed Forces has reported that the Ukrainian forces are advancing on the Melitopol and Bakhmut fronts, inflicting losses on the Russians and exhausting them. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook. Information as of 1800 on 4 November. Data. ILS. The General Staff calls the situation in Ukraine's east and south difficult. Below are your comments. Clausewitz stated in On War that all other things being equal, the stronger force will win. The C. De with a numerical advantage is more likely to prevail. It is imperative that the United States and NATO assure that all other things are not kept equal, meaning providing superior weapons, commune. Russia has lost this war. Week 87 of 3-week special operation. Ukraine is winning this war now and the Russians are exhausted and losing. Slava Ukraine. Being as Ukraine says they have never lost any battles, I do not see any reason to send them anything else. Next news. Ukrainian military officer explains why Russians ran away from Kherson. Ukrainska Pravda. Alexander Tarnovsky, commander of the Tavria Operational Strategic Group, has explained why the Russians made a difficult decision to run away from Kherson in 2022, when Ukraine's defense forces were conducting counteroffensive actions. Below are your comments. The Russians couldn't keep a supply line going over the river. They had a lot of troops there and crossing the Dnipro with pontoon bridges wasn't easy. Not with supplies sufficient to cover large numbers of troops. It's the same reason Ukraine can't cross from the west to the east side. They can I am no military genius, but if I thought I was going to be encircled, I would run away, and I am not Russian. Russians take all possible measures so their army does not get into a full encirclement. That seems like a prudent thing to do. If you become encircled, that means that any troops that are in the circle have been lost, either BLE, EP or captured. In the case of capture by Russians, that is synonymous. Next news. Congressional inaction constricts U.S. aid to Ukraine, White House. The new voice of Ukraine. The United States has started sending smaller military aid packages to Ukraine to stretch out the remaining drawdown while the U.S. Congress is in the process of deliberating whether to approve the joint Israel-Ukraine $106 billion aid package fund, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said on November. Below are your comments. Why is the U.S. the country that has to finance everything? We are broke. EU and its members closer to the action can finance things for a while. I think the time has arrived. Shut off war funds. Ukraine not going anywhere. NATO did this mess, let them pay. No congressional approval for $106 billion to Biden. No more money for Ukraine unless there is a satisfactory accounting for the $240 million a day we have already sent since the start of this no-win war. Warmongers like Biden and Senators McConnell and Graham just want to keep printing money we don't have and cannot tell how and where the money was. Next news. World Bank poised to host climate loss and damage fund, despite concerns. Reuters. Countries moved a step closer on Saturday to getting a fund off the ground to help poor states damaged by climate disasters, despite reservations from developing nations and the United States. The deal to create a loss and damage fund was hailed as a breakthrough for developing country negotiators at United Nations climate talks in Egypt last year, overcoming years of resistance from wealthy nations. The committee, representing a geographically diverse group of countries, resolved to recommend. Below are your comments. Here come the unelected non-democratic new rulers of the world. Hold on to your seats and your individuals' freedoms. The WEF want global socialism and have put in puppets like Biden, Obama, GW, Macron and Trudeau to make it happen. See there, it's all about the money, aka funding. Nothing to do with the CO2. Just the money. Funding please. Terminate the World Bank. Let them eat bugs. Just stop. Next news. Archer artillery systems already in Ukraine, Swedish defense minister says. The new voice of Ukraine. 8 Archer self-propelled artillery systems have been delivered to Ukraine, Swedish Defense Minister Pål Johnson announced on November 3, according to the SVT news agency. Below are your comments. Bleep and scoot. Mobility is life on the battlefield. It's a long line of engagement, but every little bit helps. This gun reloads automatically and can fire 20 rounds of 155 in 2 minutes. I would not want to be on the receiving end. It is less expensive than the heavy armored monsters. Highly mobile and accurate. The more Russian terrorist targets these archers eliminate, the better. Closing parenthesis. The EU is bankrupt, just like the US. The only way both systems survive is by financial trickery with each other. They trade debt and currency after hours to fool the system. Debt is how the US controls Europe. Financial collapse would have occurred otherwise. How else can you explain Europe going? Next news. Zelensky dismissed Special Operations Forces Commander Korenko at Defense Minister's request. Ukrainska Pravda. The Office of the President of Ukraine has stated that Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Major General Viktor Korenko from the post of Commander of the Special Operations Forces at the request of Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. Below are your comments. He was about to ask where the money for defense was. Looks like Ukraine is in the last chance saloon. The Americans and EU are proposing a peace deal with the Russians. If things were going as the Western press said, then they would not be proposing anything. Simple truth, they know eventually the Russians will win and it's now damage limitation time. And the unraveling ramps up. Get into negotiations ASAP, folks. Ukraine and Russia are both shuffling commanders. The difference here is Ukraine is mounting a better defense while Russia is making changes in desperation. It is what the CIA insisted happen. Next news. Ukraine war. Zelensky says Israel-Gaza conflict taking focus away from fighting. BBC. One of Russia's goals is to draw global attention away from the war in Europe, says Ukraine's president. Below are your comments. The fact that he does not want to talk about peace amazes me. The other thing is, what is the rest of the country doing, like the western part? Oh yeah, that's right, they are having rave parties and living life as if nothing happened. Also, their currency value has not dropped a dime since the start. This guy actually wants the world to revolve around him. I think he should worry about the war and finding a peaceful solution with Russia instead of begging for media attention. Zippy, it is a war, not a conflict in the Middle East. Stay up on the news, put down the villas. Our Us magazine for a few moments. Dictator Zelensky and Dictator Biden go hand in hand together, after the money. Should work toward resolving. Next news. Zelensky. Our policies bring us closer to moment when Ukrainian flag will be raised in Brussels. Ukrainska Pravda. President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated that Ukraine needs to get used to the fact that the country's policies are bringing it closer to the moment when the Ukrainian flag will be hoisted alongside flags of other EU member states in Brussels. Below are your comments. Keep on dreaming, Zelensky, good for the soul. Nations are leaving the EU and this guy is begging to join lol. By the time Theor flag is risen, it will be the only flag waving. Funny that there are only comments from Russian propagandists here today. Don't believe these false remarks. Ukrainians should have stuck with the old oligarchs before 2013 who wanted to remain and played both sides for fun and profit. The Zelensky regime left Ukraine a bloody wasteland for a proxy war between the US and Russia. Welcome to the end of the EU. Next news. MP warns Ukraine could compete with Israel for critical artillery shells, possibly Patriot missiles. The new voice of Ukraine. As the war in Israel goes on, Ukraine could end up competing with Israel for 155mm artillery rounds. And possibly missiles for the Patriot air defense system, MP Oleksandra Ustinova said in an interview. EU with Radio NV on November. Below are your comments. Biden billions donation of struggling Americans' tax money to wars as human catastrophe in both wars one's takes place. And Western democracy leaders keep playing politics. Ukraine will win because Biden is being pushed into a corner by Republicans. We have 450,000 M26 HIMARS cluster bomb rockets that are scheduled to be destroyed because of a pact we signed to get rid of cluster bombs. Biden is going to start giving Ukraine our weapons we were going to destroy. Ukraine is more important. No shish. Next news. Ukraine situation report. M1 Abrams-based mine-clearing vehicle appears in country. The war zone. Unwanted by U.S. Marines. The assault breaching vehicle will give Ukraine one more way to clear vast minefields set up by Russia. Below are your comments. As I have said on other posts, the logistics train is available now to support the Abrams frame. That was always the issue with the Abrams. So the USMC didn't want them? Some seem to forget that the DoD took all of the USMC Abrams tanks away from them. They had no choice in the matter. Bless the Ukraine's commitment to defending its homeland. Would Americans be so patriotic? My response is just one. Drip drip drip. This is exactly why Ukraine wasn't able to defeat Russia earlier, slow walking equipment and munitions. Ukraine situation report. M1 Abrams-based mine-clearing vehicle appears in country. Next news. The Nikki Haley-Ron DeSantis feud will play out in real time on next week's debate stage. CNN. After weeks spent locked in a bitter battle for second place, former South Carolina Gov. Nikki Haley and Florida Gov. Ron DeSantis will finally get the chance to grill one another in person over the Israel-Gaza conflict. Court, Ukraine's war with Russia and China's growing global influence during next week's third primary debate in Miami. Below are your comments. Shorty, do something, will get smoked or spiked with a real high heel. I will wait on Nikki Haley. I hope the information I found is incorrect. We'll wait on this. Haley's scary smart, and with Trump in jail and Biden endorsing genocide, she's next in line for the White House. DeSantis with his malevolent white supremacy won't have a chance. Haley equals a real person. DeSantis equals a phony who wears high heels. Next news. Zelensky. No one in EU and US puts pressure on Ukraine regarding negotiations with Russia. Ukrainska Pravda. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky has said that no one is pressuring him to force Kyiv to negotiate with Russia. Source. Zelensky at a press conference with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, as reported by European Pravda. Quote, "Today, none of the leaders of the European Union and the United States puts any pressure on me to negotiate with Russia." Ed. Below are your comments. Doesn't matter, Zelensky. You will be dead or in a Russian prison along with the rest of your Nazi regime. Don't you worry, Zelensky, it's coming. The fact that negotiations are even mentioned. You're a poodle. When they tell you to go to the table, you go to the table. Next news. Mediazona confirms identities of almost 36,000 Russian soldiers bleep in Ukraine. Kyiv Independent. Through open-source research, the Russian independent media outlet Mediazona, together with BBC Russia, confirmed on November 3 the names of 35,780 Russian soldiers who have been bleeped since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Below are your comments. But this invasion was supposed to last 3 to 4 days max. Things aren't going as planned, I guess. The mutiny by the International Mercenary Army was a special touch. Wish it was higher. Question is, how many Russians are fertilizers now? 200K? Please subscribe to my channel. And if you like it, please thumbs up.